Okay. Hi, everyone out there. Okay, good morning. Every time we meet here, we chant the Heart Sutra. Alternating weeks, we chant one week the English version, another week the Sino-Japanese version. And so I'd like to talk about it now, and we'll see how it goes after this. It's just going to be, there's a lot in there, so we'll just focus on the very beginning. The Heart Sutra is totally ubiquitous. It's all over the place in all Mahayana traditions. So that's Japan, China, Korea, Vietnam, Tibet, and now in America and Europe as well. It's recited, it's the sutra that's done every service, certainly in Zen, and I suspect in other traditions as well. Bill can probably tell us, I'm sure he can tell us about how old it is, and my researches on that great expert Google came up with that the first surviving manuscripts were from China in around the 600s in Chinese, and there was another discovered maybe 100 years later in Sanskrit. And there's a big fight, apparently, over whether it was first written in China or India. And who knows? But Bill probably knows, but I don't. Oh, he's not talking. Oh, no. I'm in trouble. Okay. It's a difficult text, so as I said, we'll only talk a little about it, and we'll start with the context. The sutra is entitled the Prajnaparamita Heart Sutra, which means basically the heart or the essence of perfect understanding. It's a condensation and summary of the Prajnaparamita Sutras, of which there are many, and I think they must total thousands of pages. And so this in one page is a kind of condensation of all their teachings. And to understand the Heart Sutra is a very dubious claim, which I can't claim. And I think of Newton having discovered the laws of gravitation, said this wonderful thing, which I'll repeat now. He said, "I do not know what I may appear to the world, but to myself I seem to have been only like a boy playing on the seashore, and diverting myself now and then, finding a smoother pebble or prettier shell than ordinary, whilst the great ocean of truth lay all undiscovered before me." And so we'll do the best we can. The sutra begins, Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva, practicing deep Prajnaparamita, clearly saw that all 5 skandhas are empty, transforming all suffering and distress. I think it's crucial to realize that this entire sutra is spoken by Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of great compassion. And he, in India, started as masculine, in East Asia, China, Japan, Korea, as Kuan-Yin, feminine. And it encompasses all the dualities, I would say, compassion. Mel, my teacher Mel, once told me that the Heart Sutra is the equivalent of the Metta Sutta, the Loving-Kindness Sutra, which we recite every week up in Saint Ynez. And it addresses the same problem. How can we relieve suffering? How can we find kindness for ourselves and for others? And the Metta Sutta addresses this in terms that sound and kind of are, I think, very reasonable. It says we should be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, contented and easily satisfied, and goes on like that. and traditionally, practitioners are, told to repeat in meditation certain very simple phrases. May I be free from fear, may I be happy, may I be healthy, may I dwell in peace, again and again, to help them develop loving kindness and compassion. And this is one of the very earliest sutras. And the Heart Sutra is composed centuries later and reflects a very different understanding of the same task of ending suffering and developing loving kindness. So for the early Buddhists, suffering was caused by thirst for things to be other than they are. And the sensation of that thirst would bring suffering to an end. In other words, the Four Noble Truths, the second and third of the Four Noble Truths. And early Buddhism made all sorts of lists. You have the Four Noble Truths. The last of them is the Eightfold Path. And you have the Six Paramitas. And I think it was a very helpful, a very skillful pedagogy, actually, on the part of Shakyamuni. It was a mnemonic device, easier to remember, to have a list, and then you say, well, what's the fourth? I'm forgetting what the fourth was right now. And of course, Buddhism, for the first several hundred years, there was no writings. It was all, according to the tradition, handed down generation after generation, starting with, who was it? Ananda, who was said to have memorized every word Shakyamuni spoke, which would be quite a feat. So the Heart Sutra cites many of in fact, it cites all the most crucial of these lists and says they're empty. And in this sutra, and I think others, Shariputra, who's one of Buddha's early disciples, is taken as the spokesperson for these early teachings. And the later teachings came to be looked on as sort of narrow or incomplete, which created schisms and, problems that continue to some degree to this day. And there are really three characters in the Heart Sutra, and they're Buddha, Avalokiteshvara, and Shariputra. And that becomes clear in the Tibetan version, in which you find two introductory paragraphs and a brief conclusion. So, according to this version, the Blessed One, the Buddha, entered the samadhi that expresses the Dharma called profound illumination, and at the same time noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, while practicing the profound Prajnaparamita, saw in this way. He saw the five skandhas to be empty of nature. And the five skandhas are teaching of how we are ourselves, our bodies, our thoughts, etc. So, in this description, the Buddha entered a deep state of meditation, and Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, was moved to a new understanding. Essentially, he said all things were empty of nature. And we'll get into the skandhas later, probably, assuming this continues, more next time than this time, actually. The sutra goes on. Through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to the noble Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son or daughter of noble family train who wishes to practice the profound Prajnaparamita? So here you have the Buddha in deep meditation inspiring Shariputra, the embodiment of several centuries of Buddhist teachings, to ask Avalokiteshvara how this new understanding should be practiced. And that deep meditation of the Buddha inspired Avalokiteshvara to come to this new understanding. And so Shariputra asked for this teaching, and Avalokiteshvara answered it. And the version we chant is Avalokiteshvara's answer. So we might think Avalokiteshvara is the only person going in the sutra, but it's not quite true. And the Buddha actually says not a thing. And I think that's a actually kind of profound reflection of the sutra, of the sense of emptiness, the sense that ultimately anything you say is not quite right because it's a thing and it's actually empty of self-nature. Now we can get into the sutra we actually chant. It starts with Avalokiteshvara practicing deep Prajnaparamita. So prajna might be said to be wisdom beyond wisdom, wisdom that has given up, all stuckness, all solidness. It's not saying, I know. It's saying something more like, I don't know, which is wisdom. Or I might know things, but I know that it's not going to be quite there. And it's very intuitive. It's not a matter of, lists necessarily. We could utilize them perhaps, but in the end, the lists kind of, I don't know if exactly disappear, but the lists are empty of real being, whatever that might mean. Paramita means perfection. And we speak of the 6 perfections. So we have generosity, ethics, patience, energy, concentration, and wisdom. The wisdom is the prajna. And these paramitas are basic to the life of a bodhisattva. And from one way of looking at it, a bodhisattva, an awakened being, is on one level kind of like Avalokiteshvara herself, but on another level, it's on a baby level, it's all of us trying to practice the way of life of Mahayana. So, in a way, we're all baby Buddhas, or baby bodhisattvas in any case. And as he practiced, Avalokiteshvara clearly saw that all 5 skandhas are empty, transforming all suffering and distress. That's our translation. Others simply say overcame all pain or relieved all suffering. So something wonderful happened there. At this point, well, as I said, the skandhas encompass our whole life as human beings, kind of rivers of our experience, always flowing. In a narrow sense, traditionally, form was our bodies. But the next lines of the sutra imply a much wider understanding. It goes on to say all dharmas are marked with emptiness. Now, here, dharma is in the lower case, and that means everything we encounter. Everything we encounter is a dharma in the lower case. Of course, dharma in the uppercase is the teachings of Buddha. Suppose maybe that implies to some degree that everything we encounter is a teaching of the Buddha. So Avalokiteshvara starts by discussing this first skandha, form. And she says that form is empty. Form is no other than emptiness. Emptiness no other than form. So what is form? What is emptiness? And Thich Nhat Hanh poses the next rather obvious question, empty of what? I mean, emptiness is lacking something. And it's tricky because, say, we have a cup, and it has water, we pour the water out, and we say the cup is empty. But actually, the cup is still filled with air. So it's a bit tricky. And it does not mean nothing. Avalokiteshvara says all 5 skandhas are empty. He does not say none of the 5 skandhas exist. They exist and they're empty at the same time. And Google lists about 18 or 20 different definitions of emptiness in Buddhism. And I recall Mel once saying that there are 30 or more. And so we'll take the easiest, the simplest. And the most basic way is paradoxical. It's to see how much is contained within all things, all dharmas. So when we chant the Heart Sutra, we are looking at a piece of paper. In our case, it's enveloped in plastic, but whatever, piece of paper. And the piece of paper is inconceivable. I mean, it's part of a tree. I mean, it comes from a tree. The stuff of the paper we're reading is a tree. And so the tree is contained within this paper on which we're reading the Heart Sutra. And it also contains the sun. Because the sun, without the sun, the tree couldn't exist. It contains the air. It contains the soil. It contains the rain. Without these things, the tree could not exist. Beyond that, the tree, a logger came and logged the tree, which we have some problems perhaps with now. The logger is part of the paper. The paper can't exist without the logger, nor without the truck he came in, or the axe he cut down the tree with, or his father and mother. Without them, the tree wouldn't be here, the paper wouldn't be here, and so on. So the paper contains all of this, all the things. You can't find, I think, ultimately, if you look at it, something that's not contained within the paper. And it reminds me of the diamond net of Indra, which we've talked about, where the universe is conceived of a net, kind of like a spider's net, where each, connection in the net has a jewel, and each jewel reflects every other jewel in the net. And the net is infinite. So there are infinite jewels, each reflecting infinite jewels, which are then reflected back to the other jewels. And that's, in Mahayana, a metaphor used to describe the universe. So in one sense, you could say the universe is contained in this piece of paper. And Thich Nhat Hanh has a marvelous word for this. He says interbeing. Everything is interbeing. Everything is present within everything else. And the technical term is dependent co-arising. Everything arises dependent on everything else. And so the paper is filled with all sorts of things. So what was Avalokiteshvara possibly thinking of when he said it was empty? It contains everything in the universe. But the one thing it does not contain, precisely because of that, is self-nature. It's utterly part of all the stuff is part of it. There's no independent existence of the piece of paper. It's all part of everything. We can name the tree and the sun and the soil, but it goes way beyond that. So the word paper is shorthand for all the interrelations of all things in the universe that brought it into being. And sometimes it's said that Buddhism contains no nouns. It contains adjectives. It contains verbs, so that the word empty is an adjective that we ascribe to paper, and we ascribe to the skandhas. We ascribe to everything. We ascribe to the cells. We are empty of self-being. We're full of all sorts of stuff, in fact, the universe, but we're empty of independent self-existence. And so when we point, so there's no thing called emptiness. Emptiness describes everything. It's an adjective. So, and for me, like for a long time, I was looking, what is this thing called emptiness? How can I realize it? But you might not realize, there's no emptiness out there to realize. What you realize is the nature of all things, which is empty of self-being. And when we point to the interbeing of everything, we could use the word suchness. Every being is contained in the piece of paper. And when we point out that the paper lacks a separate self, we say there's emptiness. The emptiness characterizes the paper. So suchness and emptiness are they interbe. They're referring to the same thing from a different angle. And so form is referring to one aspect, emptiness to the other. Form is referring to the thingness of us or the paper. Emptiness is referring to the nature of the paper or of us, lacking any independent existence. And so the sutra goes on to say that having come to this insight, Avalokiteshvara relieved all misfortune and distress. And so we can stop there and continue. And so, questions, comments? It's a kind of nice place to stop. Thank you, everyone. Okay. Well, I think for me, we could start, but maybe it's illegal in some